All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. Let's have that conversation on COP27 resolutions and what's in it for Kenya is the question we're wondering. There's been a lot of dedication in terms of billions of dollars for climate action plan, but what really is in it for Kenya and how come the money is not being felt in the ground? That is a conversation that we're going to have with experts in studio. Peter Odengo is here, climate finance expert and co-convener AFDAN. Thank you so much for making time. Nicholas Abuya is also here, Global Program Resilience Advisor at Christian Aid. Asante sana for making time. And Dr. Nancy Omollo, gender and climate change expert as well, is here with us. Asante sana for making time. And Mr. Odengo, I'll start with you on this. So you were in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. What stood out for you in terms of the resolutions that they got to and what's really in it for Kenya?
Thank you very much, Trevor. A number of things stood out clearly in Sharm el-Sheikh. And one of the key things that the developing countries, Next One's countries, were pushing for was the establishment of loss and damage as a fund. That, although it was very sticky, but finally there was an agreement on the need to establish that fund, and the EU really pushed for it. There is also, within the fund itself, we also agreed on the establishment of the Transitional Committee. This is the committee that will be able to define the modalities, access modalities, and also the modus operandi on how the fund will be working. The second thing which came out, but not strongly, is global adaptation goal. You know, Kenya and Africa at large, our main priority and objective is to ensure that adaptation finance is increased almost double within the next 8 years, from 2022 to 2030. Although it was pronounced, but it was not agreed unanimously that the global adaptation goal is matched with the resources that it needs at the local level. And then the third one, which also came out really, which may not be seen for a short-term gain, is the agreement to transform the global financial institutions. The central banks within the countries, the financial institutions, the banks, have to be reformed so that climate resilience and climate risk is factored within their lending portfolio, which was coming on there. But finally, the key thing which came out, particularly now for Kenya here, is the coming up of Africa to talk with one voice. The voice that we need additional resources. Climate finance should not be confused by development fund, and that the commitments which were given by the developed country, particularly the 100 billion, which was given in 2010, which up to now has not been met, came out very strongly, and we still want it to be fulfilled before the billions that were talked about is given. Up to now, it's only about $83 billion which have been mobilized and provided.
So there was 100 billion in 2010, which has not come.
Yes.
Up until now.
Yes.
And how much was declared now?
According to the comprehensive study based on the OECD study, which was commissioned before the COP26 in Glasgow, it was found that about 76 billion had already been provided and given. You know, there are two types: mobilized, provided, and given to where it is supposed to be. But this year, according to the follow-up study, it was about now 83 billion, which has been mobilized and provided within the various financial mechanisms. But what is not really agreed properly is that in 2010, there was an agreement to provide 100 billion US dollar per year up to 2030. Then the interpretation of that is that every year there should have been 100 billion. Then 100 billion times 10 is how many? Is 1 trillion. Now, there's been a change of language that it is 100 billion a year up to 2030, which is not correct. And that is, even if it was just up to 2030, that it means that within 10 years, they were to provide 100 billion. But now within 10 years, they have not provided 100 billion. So these are the things that made the developing countries and Africa to be clearly not happy with the way talk of negotiation has been going on. African special circumstances and how the money trickled down to where the climate impact is felt was not given a clear direction.
Okay. Dr. Omollo, you were also there at the Sharm el-Sheikh. What stood out for you?
Oh, thank you so much, Trevor. As my colleague Peter Odhengo has summarized some of the things which took place, so I think the setup of the Loss and Damage Fund was a real progress at Sharm el-Sheikh. And some people are asking, now what have we come up with? But the realization of this fund might take a long process. So it's not something that we're going to realize today. And I was one of the negotiators on the government of Kenya on gender and climate change. And the issue of finance was also very important. And for the first time, we're talking about, where do we finance? We're talking about gender issues, the vulnerability, and especially on the developing countries and Kenya. But how do we get the UNFCCC to commit to funding the gender issues? How do you fund the gender action plan? So it was a long process of us negotiating with them, but at the end of the day, it was not so clear. They included financing of gender, especially gender action plan, but they really did not commit that who's going to fund that money. So it's a little bit vague. But whatever we're discussing under gender and climate change has got a link to the finance, the 100 billion. But one of the questions that sometimes we ask, even if this 100 billion was released to Kenya, are we ready at the county level with the women and the youth and the vulnerable to receive this money? Because from my experience, actually even the local banks are very hesitant to give money at the local level, especially if there's no really organized groups. So those are kind of the issues that as we look for that money at the international level, how do we get prepared at the county level? Because now we are talking so much about locally led climate finance.
Yeah, and that's the biggest conversation that I want us to have right after this. How do we get prepared? And Mr. Buya, you can start us off on this. When we talk about these billions that come to the country in different places for climate change intervention, the only thing that people see on the ground is tree planting. Is that all? And how come nobody feels the effect of this money?
Thanks, Ombija, for having me. First of all, I would really start from the outset by saying that I'm adopting what I can refer to as a stubborn optimism, that the outcome of COP27 was a success for Kenya and the developing countries. But that we'll discuss as we continue. I would say that, of course, as Peter has elaborated, we had the 100 billion USD goal set more than a decade ago. And that was to be met by 2020. The assessment indicates that it was never met. The question, as we move towards this decade, which now we are dubbing the decade of implementation, it is no longer going to be business as usual. We're not going to talk about quantity, but also quality in terms of financial assistance or support. Because we want financial instruments that work for those who are at the front line of climate crisis. Of course, to some extent, funds have been mobilized, and we have the Green Climate Fund in place. Kenya has been a recipient of funds from the GCF, as it were. But unfortunately, when you try to track those funds, you find that most of the times, they hardly reach the front line. When I talk about the front line, I'm talking about the communities who are feeling the impact of climate change, like now the prolonged drought, which is affecting many parts of ASAL, that's arid and semi-arid lands of Kenya, or people who are doing, say, small-scale farming, who are suffering from the erratic weather caused by climate change. I think the emphasis is not about billions in numbers. That's quantity. It is also about quality.
Yeah. And that's where Mr. Odhengo comes in as a financial, as an expert in climate finance. What are we missing and what should be done? What do you recommend going forward?
Definitely, as my colleagues have said, particularly what Abuya just said.
Yeah.
Kenya, we have done somehow well. If you look at the global landscape of climate finance in terms of flows to the country, But we are also not doing well because there are some kind of disjointed actions and also lack of a strong governance, particularly at the local level. Why are these significant resources not reaching the local level? Number one, you know, if you look at the GCF portfolio landscape of the money that has been flowing into this continent, indeed, Kenya is one of the number 4 or one of the top 5 counties that have received significant resources from the GCF. And as late as April this year, the GCF took a Kenyan case as an example within the UN to indicate that, yes, although there is complaints of difficulty of access to these resources, there are countries like Kenya that have access to this money to the tune of $847 million US dollars, of having more than 14 projects approved in that. That means that Kenya, we have systems. Kenya, we have the expertise. Kenya, we have understood how the complex systems can be overcome to bring in the money at the national level. We are competing with 154 countries globally. But after competing with 154 countries globally, when we bring resources from the NDAs and the focal points, now there is a level that needs to take that, because the constitution is very clear. National level is policy. The institutions at the national level, their role is, for example, to mobilize, bring it at the national level, then take that devolved system to the counties level. Where we had a problem, where my colleague Abuya is saying, is that at the county level, we have never been organized to receive, disperse, and also to deploy the resources at the local level. And then the last one is, again, there is, in the access of climate finance, there is indirect and there is direct access. You find that a number of indirect access organizations do not have links to the local level, particularly the ward level where locally led action should be done. They are here at the policy level. There is no link because of the disorganization. And at the end of the day now, Nancy is complaining that the women are not accessing this money.
Yeah.
So we need to work jointly together. And the good thing now is that the counties have realized their responsibility. And by the time we're talking now, more than 43 counties have already enacted their Climate Change Act, established their climate change funds, and also have dedicated a number of the technical officers and the champions there. So we are not badly off, but as he said, the money from the international community is not got through talks.
Yeah.
It is got through coming up with bankable project proposal. And it is that bankability that draws in the money. Then the access and the utilization and the deployment is now the responsibility of all, including you, Trevor.
So is it lack of goodwill or lack of technical skills and the know-how?
The technical skill that we have is a higher level technical skill that is competing at the global landscape. The technical skill that we have has not been transmitted or has not been translated to the subnational and to the local level. And that is where we have a problem.
Okay.
That is where we have a problem. People are saying, where is this money?
Okay.
But people are saying, the money climate finance money is in your doorstep, number one. The ask Kenya has been implementing sustainable climate smart agriculture over the last 5 years, funded by World Bank at a cost of $250 million US. 33 counties has been part of it. Nobody knows that climate finance is flowing into their villages. We have 23 million US dollars funded by the GCF, covering the 11 ASAL counties in this country. Why are the counties not going for it? So we need to get that disconnect and coordination and governance. But finally, Abuya and my colleague, we have to capacitate the local people to take charge of their own responsibility.
Yeah.
The frontline person is my old grandmother in Wajir, not somebody sitting in Nairobi.
Exactly. And Dr. Omollo, how can this be pulled off? Because you're dealing with gender justice and it's very interlinked with the climate change. But like what Mr. Denga is saying, that the money is at the doorstep, nobody knows how to access it. What can be done to bridge that gap?
I think what Mr. Denga said is very important, that, Kenya has received a lot of money. There's a lot of various projects which have been funded, by the international climate finance. And just as he sits next to me here, Mr. Denga was the brain behind the FLOCA program, financing locally led climate change, which attracted almost 17 billion, and which I've been part of I've been in the program as the gender expert. And all the 47 counties are supposed to receive certain grants from that money. And they're supposed to actually meet certain conditions, have climate act in place, the climate bill, and all that, which most
but have they received that?
Most of them have done that, more than 3/4. Actually, when I was at the COP, I met some governors who are even sharing with me, oh, we are ready. When is the money coming? So actually the counties are saying, when is the money coming? We really want to receive this money. And even out of that money, if every county is going to receive that money, under the FLOCA, we designed it that 30% of that money should go to the women, the youth, and the marginalized. And we also need to create certain indicators that we're going to use to measure that what has been the impact of this money on this kind of group of people. So during the COP, as many people are saying that, is COP necessary? And one of the things I say that, the COP27 or other COPs have been very necessary because we help shape the policies. And it's also a time for us to kind of network. So during the COP, I met almost 4 governors. And I had a round table with 2 governors. And one of the things they're telling me that, we are ready. We would like, for example, to ensure that, what we say here and also the money we're going to receive really transform the livelihood at the local level. But we do not know how to do it. How do you implement gender and climate action? So actually now I'm in talks with Migori County and also Homa Bay counties that, for example, how can we pilot certain projects in certain wards? You realize that wards are so many. A county like Migori County has over 40 wards. So even if one ward you just went to work with 100 people, you recruit them at the local level. When you work in 3 wards, you'll be reaching 300 people. And most of the time when you pilot, you cannot pilot in all the 46 wards. But what we want to show them is that, is climate action working? So even at the COP, apart from the negotiating that we want this money, we had a lot of side events. So one of the side events I was invited to is one of them by Tomorrow Now. And Tomorrow Now is coming up with a climate intelligence project whereby it's going to give small-scale farmers and especially women climate information. And also it's linking them, for example, to KALRO, the Kenya Agricultural, Livestock and Research Institutions, so that farmers can have certified seeds. And one of the interesting things that they invited me to this talk, because I was able to show evidence that if farmers have this kind of information, then their livelihood can be transformed. So for example, I was giving them an example of Isiolo County, whereby Kenya Meteorological Department went there and told the farmers, because you're facing food insecurity, we want to give you climate information so that you can increase your productivity. And the farmers told them, you're not God. Our ancestors have always farmed without climate information and other generations. So who are you? So the Kenya Meteorological Department just went and set their farms. But they had more productivity than the farmers. So the farmers went and asked them, could we also, what are you doing? Why is it that you have more productivity and us, we are not having the same? And they said, because we're using climate information. And this was Isiolo. And I think when we went to that meeting, we were with Nicholas under the ADA consortium. So I met a woman who used to receive food aid. And because now she's able to get climate information, right climate information from Kenya Meteorological Department, now she's producing more food and selling some in the market. And she's also a champion for the United Nations on how to do successful farming. And she says that now she cannot do her farming without getting climate information from Kenya Meteorological Department. And this is seasonal weather forecast, which says that the rain of March, April, May is going to be shorter or longer. So instead of growing maize, grow maybe cowpeas. And they also give weekly climate information. So we've moved from a place whereby Kenya Meteorological Department is telling the community that we want to give you climate weather information and farmers demanding on it. So that was one case study that I showed that when farmers have the right climate information, then it can transform their livelihood. And I gave another example again about the Homa Bay County, where we went to somewhere called Rodi and we found farmers growing a cassava, which was taking 2 years. And when we worked with these farmers, we were able to link them to Calro to give them a variety which takes 8 months to grow. So you can imagine a farmer has to wait for 2 years to harvest the cassava, and now a farmer only has to wait for 8 months. So that means that there's more food on the table and more money in the pocket. So what I was just demonstrating, that this is a farmer who was only given new variety and it transformed livelihood. And here we gave these farmers only climate information. So can you imagine in a place whereby you've set up a trial and one farmer has access to climate information, they have access to certified seeds, they can mobilize their resources, they can do table banking. So these are the things I'm telling the governors. Why can't we set some trials, then we upscale them at the county level, and we'll see transformation of livelihoods.
Yeah, and so Mr. Buya, what should this capacity building look like? As a resilience advisor yourself, what would it look like? Say, for example, what Mr. Dengo is saying, my grandmother in Wajir, in Isiolo, in Nyakach, how should that capacity building look like? When you walk up to her, what would you tell her to think about? Because when you talk to her about billions of dollars, she has no idea how much that money is. All she knows is a little djembe and she goes to the farm. That's it. So how should the capacity building look like so that we upscale this uptake of the finances that's around?
Okay, thanks, Trevor. When you talk about capacity building, it can mean so many things to different people, depending on the circumstance they face when it comes to the impacts of climate change.
Yeah.
So really, I would say that capacity building can range from what Dr. Nancy Omollo has talked about in terms of providing relevant climate information that farmers or individual can use to make decisions, appropriate, say, adaptation decisions. Yeah. It can also include even aspect related to transfer of technology, appropriate technology for them to be able to adapt and cope with the changing climate. And of course, it can also include climate finance. Yeah. Because, for example, people could be having knowledge that they need to actually plant drought-tolerant crops or fast-maturing crops in face of climate change, but they may not be having money to buy, say, seeds of the drought-tolerant crop type, you see. So it can even include aspects to do with training and imparting skills and knowledge on, say, appropriate adaptation technologies. It could be to smallholder farmers, yeah, or even livestock keeping people, etc., etc. So it can take different forms and shapes. Really, going back to the point that I raised earlier, that I'm taking a stubborn optimism that COP27 outcome was good for Kenya and other developing countries, I would point out that, yes, we had a breakthrough on one aspect, particularly loss and damage fund, that was agreed on to be established. And there is a transitional committee going to work on that and give a report at the next COP, COP28. But that was not the only thing that developing countries were demanding for. For example, adaptation has always remained a priority for us. It is a priority as we speak right now, and it will continue being a priority for developing countries in the future. But when you look at the outcome of COP27 on matters related to adaptation, it was, to say the least, disappointing. Because from COP26 that happened at Glasgow, the developed countries committed to double their funding on adaptation to the tune of 40 billion USD, if I'm not wrong, yeah, by 2024. But when we met at, when there was a meeting in the COP27, I think that was never even touched. Because ideally speaking, we should be having incremental progress on commitments made on COP. So what does that one mean for developing countries that adaptation is a priority for them?
Yeah.
It means that we are not going to get the desired support from developed countries. And in any event, we are likely to come to 2024 without a doubling of funding to adaptation, which is priority for us. And that one means that we may not be having the capacity that you just asked me about to really adapt to the changing climate.
Okay.
So that's why I say that I had a stubborn kind of optimism about the outcome of COP27, given that adaptation, which is a priority for developing countries, was not really well addressed, and there were no commitment really extracted that are tangible.
All right, I have to take a quick break, Mr. Deng. I'll come back with you on this conversation in just a bit. And also keep your views coming at Trevor Mbiji at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Daybreak. We're talking about the COP27 resolutions and what's in it for Kenya. That's what we'd like to hear from you as well. What do you recommend going forward? How can these funds be accessed easily by the people down there? Do you even understand what scope the funds capture? That's why I have the experts here in studio to explain to us how we can come in and play a role, because climate change does affect everyone, all right? At Trevor Mbiji at Citizen TV Kenya, use the hashtag Daybreak. See you in just a bit.